Welcome to the Tenant Podcast. Today we are in Rapid City, South Dakota again. We are on this trek of featuring different South Dakota artists this month, so I hope you're enjoying it. I've mentioned it before. I live in Denver, but Wes Brown lives in Rapid City, South Dakota, and so he's been coming down. We've been featuring a lot of Denver artists, but now it's my turn, and I'm in South Dakota with Wes, and we're featuring a bunch of really phenomenal artists here in South Dakota. And I got to give a shout out. Today, we are in the Perfect Wave Productions storefront doing this podcast. This is located at 1215 East St. Patrick Street in Rapid City. And they specialize in professional audio, video, acoustics, lighting, live sound, and electronics repair. So if you have any sound needs, contact Scott Gooch or Jay Allen at Perfect Wave Productions here in Rapid City, and they will hook you up. Today on the podcast, we have the phenomenal artist Tom Rasch, who is a comic book artist and content creator. Tom, how are you?
Great. Glad to be here, guys.
Thank you for taking time out of your Sunday and sitting down with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
So talk about what you do. I think most people kind of get an idea from that description that, you know, obviously that you do comics, but what is a content creator?
A content creator is a person who, since there's been multi-platform things taking off, intellectual properties, it's not just one genre that you're creating something for. You create things with the eye towards this will make not just a comic book, a cartoon, a film, video games, novels, all sorts of things. And so that's kind of been a buzz term that's been around for a year or two. Like the streaming platforms have really taken off, and they're hungry for content, which a lot of times means movie or TV material. But considering that it is, like I said, a multi-platform age, it's just an easier way to describe that I'm a person who creates these intellectual properties, and the purpose behind them is for them to be mined for exploitation of, like I said, merchandising and licensing and anything that you can think of, you know. And I'm sort of doing this backwards, but like I have a couple of projects that I've kind of gained headway over the last several years, and I'm currently talking to a guy that wants to start these theme parks, location in Louisiana, another one in Las Vegas, and he wants to take a couple of my intellectual properties and make them into a ride, two of my characters. So there's an example of, you know, he's taking the content and going to use it for like a theme park. Kind of like, you know, when you go to theme parks now, there's, you know, Disney, of course, has the monopoly with Star Wars and the Marvel comics characters. But, you know, when you go somewhere and you see like cartoon characters being the face or the motif of a ride, you know, there's another example that everyone is always thinking of splintering these off into kind of a pie system of how we can use these properties. And so, because, you know, there are people out there who are comic book artists, and they draw from Marvel or DC or maybe a different company, but they're primarily drawing the stories that are generally created by someone else. They're not necessarily, and like I said, I don't begrudge anybody that, but they're in a different space than I am, where I'm like, I've done that, but I also have an interest, very passionate interest in creating my own characters and getting them off the ground in the pop culture landscape. And so that's why I've kind of tagged the content creator, and besides being comic books, because some people will think, oh, well, you draw Superman. And there are some artists that are like, yes, I draw Superman, or I draw the X-Men or whatever, and that's what I do. But my focus now more than ever is the content creation to kind of get my own characters off the ground. And a couple of those have had interest in Hollywood, where one called Black Alpha has been optioned 3 different times for movie and TV development. And another one is Salem Tusk, which I'm working with a former WWE wrestler who's gaining some traction as an actor in Hollywood. And we're doing kind of a vehicle, another character of mine, as kind of a starring role for him as an action adventure kind of Indiana Jones thing. And like I said, because of me promoting heavily on something like Facebook, the guy that's starting the theme park saw what I was doing, especially with the one particular character with the former wrestler, and said, I think that this character, I'm building this steampunk theme park that I have going on. And since your character is a steampunk character, I think he would fit perfect. And because it's new, I think he kind of feels like it's kind of a sort of a ground floor opportunity to get something out there, you know, to the public consciousness.
Right, that nobody else has really glommed onto yet, right?
Well, and I semi-joke that I would imagine, because I'm obviously not a conglomerate that I would be a little easier to deal with too. There's
Sure.
a lot of hoops to jump through to get the licensing for these well-known characters that have been around for decades.
So let's kind of go backwards some more. Were you always interested in comics? Were you a big comic book reader as a child? How did you get so taken with the whole comic book world? Did you always want to be an artist? Did you always want to draw characters and create your own universe?
Well, I would say that there were two big milestones for me when I was about 4 years old, and they're interlinked. And one of them is I saw the old Batman TV show with Adam West, the Spider-Man cartoon, and Star Trek. Those were my first memories of television. And then also around this time, my mother, who's a wonderful artist, my mother Maggie, had a lot of her old drawings laying around. And so I would actually take those and try and start copying them. And then, of course, like a lot of kids who doodle, I would draw pictures of the Batmobile and the Enterprise. It was one of those, it just kind of happened that way, I think, simpatico or whatever the term is, that between my mother having an interest. And then I come from a very creative family. My dad is a musician. My mother's an artist. So I think that, and a lot of my siblings are musicians and a couple of my brothers draw, that it seems like, maybe it's something we get from mom and dad. I don't know if it's a DNA thing or not,
right.
but also being around, and the personalities. And so I think that art in general has been a part of all of our lives. But for me, that's my personal memory of how that stuff just became important. And also I think that I didn't think about it too much, obviously, at that age when you're in preschool or kindergarten, but I knew I just really enjoyed drawing. And right away I was wanting to emulate the things I saw on television that I was really, really interested in. And so like the character Black Elf I mentioned, the one that's been optioned a few times and actually was also published in USA Today several years ago. I say that's that's a creation, I think, that sort of is a result of that, because I took the superhero myth and also science fiction and combined it, probably because of my love for Star Trek and Batman. And I think that the things that I do are always a result of what I've been passionate about, and I think just the arts in general, like I said, music, the visual arts, acting, writing, all of those have been kind of connected to me as a form of self-expression. And there's times I think there's a blessing and a curse with being a creative, but it's like you can't help yourself, even with sort of the rough times of what I think that can represent for some people, that you realize you're sort of bound to it, even if it's painful at times, because I think that there's a lot of issues, and anyone out there listening would relate. Like there's a vulnerability about putting your material out there, what you do, because, you're sharing it with potentially a lot of strangers, and we shouldn't crave validation, but we're human beings, and I think that's also kind of taught to us since we were very young, that everyone likes to hear good job, you get a pat on the back. And so when you're releasing that out there, it's a real double-edged sword, because you could be living with tons of existential angst, because you're like, well, am I doing what I'm doing? Does it really matter, or am I any good? And so I think that that's some of the potential downside when you're creative, is when you take that leap. Because I think I applaud anyone that decides to put something out there that they're going to share with an audience. It doesn't matter what it is, because that to me is kind of jumping off the cliff. Like, I'm going to take this move and we'll see where things go. And, your life may never be the same. And I'd say for me that I kind of got used to as a little kid sharing my drawings, and I didn't really think about whether or not I was good at all. I just was like, here, take a look at this, and most of the time I did get like, oh, good job or whatever. And so that might have fueled a little bit of the interest, but I think it's part of who I am anyway, and my personality, that I just love things. And when I fall in love with them, that love stays there forever. So I never had a period where I outgrew the things that I've been into. And the comic book part, by the way, came a little later on. So I tell people with my exposure on television, that was the first thing. And then when we were stationed overseas, my dad, Bob, was in the Air Force. So that's when I first saw those things, was overseas. When we came back to the States, I think I noticed a comic book like in a grocery store. And so I asked my mom to buy me a Batman comic book. And I remember flipping through it and being very completely confused, because this was Neil Adams, who's a very famous comic book artist in the very 60s and early 70s. His take on Batman was kind of the complete antithesis of the Adam West version. So I was thrown off, because I'm like, he's got these really long ears, and Batman's cape looks like it's, the length of a city block. And where's Robin at, So
he was a darker looking
much darker
character
version, yeah,
than Adam West.
The way he was originally envisioned. So I remember kind of being confused by that, but I loved the art that went into it. And then my dad got stationed over by Chicago, Illinois, Central Illinois, Chanute Air Force Base. So my mom is from South Dakota, and my grandparents lived here. So we'd come here to visit. And my uncles, who were teenagers at the time, had all of their Marvel and DC comic books. And so they would sit there and drag those out of the attic in my grandma's house, and I would sit there and flip through them. And so from there, I went to probably, around 7 or 8 years old, being introduced. They were super cool because they were teenagers. They introduced me to comic books, or a wider range of characters, and Bruce Lee both at the same time. So that's another milestone for me. Loving martial arts and Bruce Lee and what he, like a real life superhero, but also all these other characters besides Batman and Spider-Man were out there. And so right around that time, as we get to middle grade school years, I started actually noticing artistic styles too. So it wasn't just about the characters. I was sitting there looking at a character going, I don't know why, but I like the way that this is drawn. And so, this was right before Star Wars blew up. So I would say that was connected to probably a notion that I didn't realize I wanted to be a storyteller. And I remember right around 5th grade, I'm like, I either want to write and direct movies or I want to draw comic books. And at the time I'm going, well, from what I understand about Hollywood, I didn't use this terminology back then, but I'm like, that's a pretty tough business to crack. And seems like there's, the sharks that swim around you have to deal with. So I'm like, comic books is going to be an easier route, which turned out not to necessarily be true. But it's still about visual storytelling and well, it isn't always, I guess, visual, but I'm saying the visual component of comic books is like the cousin of film and television because you're using the visual images to relay a story. So I think that from that point, I always knew what I wanted to do with my life. And I wasn't sure how I was going to get there, but I spent a lot of time reading, which I still do currently. If I don't know how to do it, I want to know how I'm going to do it. And so I spent a lot of time doing research. And like people ask me, they're like, did someone teach you how to do art or draw? And like I said, my mother was my first inspiration, but everything that I've learned, I teach myself because I just couldn't wait, even as a kid, wait to get my hands on a book or magazine. Like I'd collect the behind of scenes, like Star Wars, like the behind the scenes books, just to see how designs changed, and that was something that I was very interested in. And I think I didn't have much of a social life back then, so that obviously did help a little bit. So I spent a lot of time either in front of the TV or reading my books. And self-education was important to me, not school,
right?
Because I didn't do well in school, and I wish I would have had a different attitude about history and those things. But I'm saying that the things I was very passionate about learning, like those things would just lock in because I'd read things over and over again. And like I said, it's still, because I get people coming to me currently going, how do you do this? And I don't mean to sound rude, but I'm like, well, Google and YouTube are your greatest new friends. And I said, that's what I do constantly. Yeah. I don't have to run out of the library necessarily. I said, you can almost have any question. And I said, YouTube or Google will have some sort of a link to an article or a video showing you how to do these things.
Yeah, this is a great time for people that want to learn anything because there's all sorts of, like YouTube and that, but there's also classes like Creative Live and, Linda and all those kind of high-end trainings that weren't available to somebody like us when we were younger. Mm-hmm. If you pay a little bit of money, you can learn how to do what you're doing in the comfort of your home.
It's an awesome time because we have so many resources available, just like Wes said, and so many opportunities to educate ourselves, but it also becomes a little more difficult because that information is brought to the masses. So your competition is significant in this day and age, no matter what you do as a creative, I think. I mean, what makes you stand out is if you actually have talent, mm-hmm. that definitely will make you stand out. But we were listening to a podcast yesterday, Michael O'Neill, I can't remember the guest, but he was telling this story, this guy that he had on. He was talking how he'd gone to this conference. These kids they started out by doing all these short videos, and they were talking about how phenomenal these kids, even though they're not great storytellers yet, but their editing abilities are phenomenal. Like they're just intuitive with it. And they went from being like these kind of cult figures on YouTube. They filmed themselves, they got locked into a Target store at night on purpose. And then they spent the whole night eluding security. And they made this whole little movie about them running around this store trying to elude security. And from that, they did a bunch of other videos. And the dad showed this guy that is a mover and shaker in the podcast and YouTube world. He showed it to this guy, and the dad was like, I don't even understand this or what it's about, but they have like thousands of followers. Mm-hmm. And the guy told this father, he said, you know what? Tell them to keep doing what they're doing and just encourage them, because if they keep doing what they're doing, they will at some point they'll reach that point, that tipping point, and they'll just take off. Now they're making like millions of dollars just because they had this idea.
Yeah, it's crazy. I was just talking to somebody about this recently. There's this kid, I don't know his name either, but he's probably about 7 or 8 years old, and he brings in millions in revenue on his YouTube channel for unboxing kids' toys. And we're kind of in that, any of us that are a little bit older, there's this weird sort of cusp of area that we're in where certain things are confusing and certain things make sense. And I know for me, I don't know, maybe because of how I kind of view my experiences and my memories of what quality is as far as like what's engaging to an audience, that it's a little confusing to me. But I suppose that there's a relatability to people who do things and people all of a sudden glom onto their channel. Because, you can't plan to make something go viral. Sometimes it's one of those, the lightning in a bottle moment where they happen to be at the right place at the right time. But yeah, it's a really weird time. It's an exciting time, but a bizarre time, I think, for me personally, because having the goal of attracting an audience, and I'm learning this stuff still as I go along, because the approach I've taken is I create things that are kind of familiar but new. I say I give it my fresh coat of paint. But I didn't anticipate, that the age that we live in, I was also going to be having to buying, for attention for numerous other conduits. Like you said, when we were younger, television was all we kind of had.
Right.
And now you have so many other things vying for attention, and so I've had to kind of constantly continue to attempt to adapt. How do I kind of keep relevant and also the fact that we get tired of things a lot quicker. We're conditioned to get bored with things a lot quicker. Something that is the viral moment or trending, tomorrow, we've seen that happen in the media, even when celebrities pass away. Everyone's talking, next thing, the next celebrity comes along a day or so later. And so that's something that I don't necessarily have the answers for, but I'm trying to keep an eye on, because I know that like with some of the stuff I've done, there are people that are like, well, let's try and create like some sort of way to make this viral. And I'm like, it's not going to happen. I mean, there's a 1% chance it might happen, but more often than not, you can't shoehorn that stuff in there. And that's something I've learned even with what I'm attempting to do, because I follow like someone's story, a hero of mine that got his feet in the door with films or whatever, or he's taken this approach. And I try and do all those things. And sometimes it's hard not to expect the results to be the same as this other person. And that's probably the biggest learning lesson for me in all of this, is that I have to also kind of be organic with my expectations too. So,
and I think just being authentic to your vision and not trying to chase that flash in the pan, because I think you're right. It's kind of serendipitous. It either happens or it doesn't. So if you can be authentic in your approach, in your vision, I think you're better off.
Yeah. And I know that sometimes, and because I promote so heavily, like I've mentioned on Facebook, I get a lot of good feedback, and I have some colleagues in the entertainment industry that are also kind of give me their 2 cents, where they sort of give me their tough love talk at the moment. Even them, they have strong opinions. Well, I think, Tom, you would probably progress or have more traction if you did this instead. And I don't always necessarily agree, but they're kind of doing the same thing. Well, if you would do this step 1, 2, 3, this should be the result of what you're doing. Because I know here's where things are very bizarre right now, especially when it comes to the comic market. Comic market sales are at an all-time low, and the films that are derived from them are keeping the Hollywood industry afloat with, especially the Disney juggernaut with Marvel.
Right.
So they're like, because like Black Alpha, I've been trying to get done as a comic now for a few years. The first issue was published in USA Today.
Right.
I have 3 more issues I need to get done in order for it to be sold in comic shops. But I've wrestled with it, and I've had to release it because I'm like, well, the only thing I can control with a little help is getting the production of this comic done. But, for the longest time, I've tried to kind of do, the cart before the horse, where I'm like, well, if I do these merchandise prototypes and I do these concept pieces, that's enough to show a studio, oh, hey, I can see the potential in this, and then I would also help finish the comic. But, where people are like, well, if you get the comic done, you'll probably have a better chance of someone being interested, because then you're building your audience for your story. And I'm like, there's a certain amount of truth for that, but the litmus test is not the same, because, comics will be lucky if some of them sell a few hundred to several thousand, and Marvel and DC's numbers are anywhere between maybe 60,000 to 100,000 units. That was considered a joke years ago, but that's considered like a hot selling comic. So I'm like, it's not the same as books, where somebody can say, well, somebody wants to try and make a movie out of your novel. It sold 2 million copies on the New York Times bestseller list. And so I've had to really lately kind of retrain my brain to get away from that thinking of like, well, comics only sell this much, and still kind of honor the fact that because people have been very supportive of what I've been doing for the last several years, even though there hasn't been like really a story that they can wrap their head around yet. I was kind of hoping the movies or the cartoons, that's how they can get into the world that I've created. But, I will say this for any of the uninitiated, dealing with Hollywood, kind of like when I was a kid, and I thought is not for the faint of heart, because there's a lot of dishonesty you have to swim through and a lot of disappointments. One thing looks like it's going to happen 1 second and then falls apart. And I've kind of been on that roller coaster now for a good 7 or 8 years. Even right now, there's things going on behind the scenes that could turn into something, but I've also gotten better not oversharing that stuff, because I get let down and the people that are following kind of get disappointed too. And I think after a while, they don't understand, but they probably sort of view it as the boy who cries wolf. Like, there's only so many times you can tell me this is going to be a movie or TV show and then nothing, So I'm trying to also adjust my thinking on that. But
there's like a fine line, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's almost like you don't want to share it at some point because you've been let down so many times. So you're like, all right, I'm just not going to say anything about it until it actually happens, because like you just related, if you say something about it, it's almost like the universe goes, well, I'm just going to slap you, again. That's the way I feel with certain creative endeavors that I've had, and it's almost better not to even talk about it sometimes.
Well, and I know initially, like when I got on Facebook, I don't know anyone else, but I did the MySpace thing briefly, and then I heard people talking about Facebook. So when I joined Facebook, I wasn't on it very much, and then one day I made a conscious choice that I'm like, if I'm going to be on Facebook, I'm going to be here to promote what I do. That's it. And even back then, it wasn't quite letting people into my personal life. So a number of years, I'm like, I'm here to show my art to people, and it was kind of a good example of like, does your stuff resonate? And that's basically what I still do now, because I'm the brand new father of a 1.5-year-old daughter. I kind of let people into my world with her a little bit. But yeah, we were talking earlier, like I tend to not share my views on anything because I'm not interested. It's not what my page, I don't want to have that dialogue. And I have friends, very good friends from high school, that we are in complete disagreement about politics, but we remain friends because we kind of both know better. Like, I'm not going to change their mind. They're not going to change mine. But a lot of people, that's such a hot button for them. And it's hard for them to disassociate from how a lot of times those kind of heated debates don't go anywhere.
Right.
So that's where I'm like, on my page, I won't have any of that stuff. And I've even kind of very nicely reminded people from time to time, I don't really allow swearing on my page. I have nieces and nephews that my brothers and sisters' kids can come to my page and look at my page. They're like young kids, or at least late grade school, early junior high. So I always gentle reminders, I'm not really mean about it, but I'm like, please don't talk theology, politics, and I don't want any sex toys or any of that kind of stuff.
Any weirdness.
Yeah.
Anything that isn't family friendly.
Yeah, well, like you said, it goes along with that, how people behave, when they have the veil of the internet wall there, they kind of behave a certain way. Like, I don't see people, I wouldn't imagine people would go into someone's house and decide to share sex jokes, or, what I mean, to like a family environment, or even, although I know some people that would do that, they're so passionate about their political beliefs, but like any work environment, most places you work for on a professional level will tell you, do not talk politics here, do not talk religion here, because, there's not a place for it, because it just doesn't end well. That's probably the one thing I guess that I don't care for, like we said, about how social media has changed how we behave, because it's kind of given people like a forum sometimes to be mean that you wouldn't expect to be mean or rude or whatever the case is. And I know that a lot of times this is one of those little things about being a creative. And I'll let people know that if somebody's going out of their way to troll what I'm doing, I just block them.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not going to play games.
Click.
Yeah. And then people respond and say, well, but you should have like a thick enough of an ego to recognize that not everyone's going to enjoy what you're doing. But I'm like, this isn't about that. I'm always open for critique. That's how you grow as an artist. But I said, when somebody's blatantly just being mean because they think it's funny, I said, no, that's not critiquing. That's just being a jerk. So I said, you get blocked. I've learned that lesson too, because I think that there's a weird kind of Jerry Springerdom to social media that Facebook
absolutely.
does. Like that whole watching the train wreck thing.
Yeah.
And so I don't appreciate that aspect of it either, where it's kind of created this like yucky behavior in people. They're sharing too much of their personal life or problems they're having with a relative, any of that kind of stuff. And I usually try and tune that out when I'm on there, and still remember why I'm on social media. But the biggest thing, one of the biggest pluses, is that there's positive connection. Like, your wife has seen what I've done, mention something to you, and here I am today meeting both you fine gentlemen. I think that that's a good thing.
Right.
So that
we wouldn't have had that connection without Facebook.
Exactly. Well, and even these Hollywood opportunities is because people would say, well, how did how did you get, the other thing I forgot to mention, I'm a huge fan of the show anyway, but The Big Bang Theory, my Black Alpha merchandise was seen on numerous episodes of that. And that was because of somebody I met on Facebook who had a connection to the TV show. And then other friends who had connections to USA Today said, hey, we're going to be launching this line of original comics. Your comic we think would be great. And so that's how I got connected. You know what I mean? So that's one thing I can't reiterate enough, that I've had great opportunities, or even people wanting to try and turn it into a movie or TV show has been because of Facebook. So that part I am grateful for. But, it's just like anything. I think life is about balance, and I think people need to approach the appreciation with social media a balance with it. So, and kind of turn away from all the negative.
I think you're right on as far as how you utilize it. That's the way I try to utilize it. I guess I don't get how some people are as far as the politics and that sort of thing. I don't get wrapped up in it. I don't block people per se, but I definitely scroll. I know exactly what this person's about and what they're going to be ranting. I just keep scrolling. I just don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. I'm friends with those people because there's virtues about that particular person that I really like. And despite their views, even whether I agree or disagree with them, I like them for who they are and not what religion they practice or what.
Exactly.
They're a good person in some way, shape, or form, and that's why we're friends.
No, I agree 100% because, you can't totally shut someone out. I mean, I'm of the same philosophy that the virtue of the person should be what counts, the core, I guess, of what they're about, as opposed to some of the surface leanings that might be different. But I will say this because, I was asking earlier kind of about your podcast, is that I'm a huge proponent anthropologically, culturally, about what the arts represent for us as a species and communication. And I think that's why I constantly try and promote the positivity of what self-expression is all about. And so that's why comic books, I tell people, I said, they're modern mythology. Anything that moves our spirit, I said, is a good thing in this world. And so that's another reason why my page is set up that way, because I just want to promote fun, nostalgic memories of things that kind of make us feel good, brings us back to our childhood for a minute, toys, and TV shows that we collectively all sort of seem to care about. And I think that there's a lot of good that comes from that. So that I will constantly push as an agenda for me personally as an artist is also, art really does kind of lift us up and puts us in a better place. And I think that social media, like I said, does try and quell that because the drama factor that it has. And so I'll just constantly remind people, let's have some fun and let's promote positive things too.
Absolutely.
Along with it.
So do you see art though as well, and obviously it's a lot out there, but art as a social commentary, and do you use that to address themes of today that you don't necessarily agree with? Maybe a political rival, you take their essence and create a character from that?
Well, the odd thing is that, I have a couple of stories that I created when I was a teenager that are actually fairly political. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize it as much back then, but I'm all for political allegory if it's done in a certain manner. I mean, Star Trek is a perfect example, where as a kid, it was all about Captain Kirk and the Enterprise and phasers. But as I got older, of course, I realized that all the allegory that was going on. And I think there's a good balance as to why Star Trek was so successful. It didn't turn people off. It didn't make people angry for the most part, I would imagine, and turn them away. So I do have little political undertones in my work, but I try not to hit people over the head with them. That's not the kind of stories that I really want to tell. But I do want my stories to kind of reflect the same thing that I grew up with, where on the surface it's a simple intergalactic adventure story, but underneath I want it to reflect the human experience. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what great characters and these things we've loved for decades are all about, is to, as the old saying goes, to bring out the best in us, like Superman. And, it's funny because Superman has kind of been smeared in the media the last several years as he's not a relatable character. And I'm like, well, that to me is someone trying to kind of write like a puff piece to get, eyes on what they're doing. And I'm like, Superman is all about, a person who their superpower is not whether or not he can lift up a car. It's about him having the personality to do the good stuff. And I said, that's what it should be about, Right. But any characters in comic books or science fiction, especially for me, they resonate partially because, like I said, there's something that we can identify with. And I think certain movie studios have tapped into that, like Pixar movies. Pixar movies are very popular because I think they find that right balance of what our story is, our human story, mm-hmm. and they learn to tell it in an entertaining way. And that's what to me, storytelling in general for thousands of years probably has been about, to inspire us to always make better choices. And so that's always going to be my mantra, I think, until, the day I pass, that's what art should represent.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So, and I don't know why I'm going down this road, but I used to watch Joseph Campbell and The Power of Myth, and his connection to Star Wars. He really took the journey of the hero and enveloped it in Luke Skywalker. And so it's just kind of interesting. I like the philosophical side of it. So it's kind of fun to watch how it's connected to current Hollywood themes and maybe, and they're universal themes from very beginning of time, but it's kind of fun to see that and see that philosophical connection to Hollywood movies that we think are made for kids or whatever, but really they're a deeper theme, and it's just kind of fun.
Well, the nerd part of me that gets passionate about stuff, George Lucas has taken his lumps for the last 20 years, but because he said these films were made for kids, I do kind of slightly disagree with him. I think that he probably had kids in mind, but I think the reason Star Wars resonated, obviously, it's taken a lot of the symbolic motifs that are familiar through fairy tales. Same thing. I don't think we realize it when we're watching it, but I mean, Darth Vader's the evil Black Knight. Luke is the young errant knight, sword in the stone kind of thing, Arthurian legend. And I think that that's a classic example of we glommed onto something without realizing that it told a very, Luke had to slay his dragon, basically, the Death Star, to kind of, move, like you said, the hero's journey about what our life is about, which is leaving the confines of our safe space, which is living, as a child living at home with your parents and facing these adventures in the bigger universe, the big city or whatever the case is, that I think that was an important part of cinema history to have that kind of story to tell, especially in the 70s when there was a lot of gritty kind of anti-heroes and those kinds of things. And so I think that Star Wars came along at the right time. And even when I pitch to Hollywood, like I sort of take this similar approach where, the elevator pitch is where you try and tell what your story's about in about a sentence or a phrase. And so sometimes I compare them like, well, Star Wars was basically kind of a World War II movie and a Western and a samurai movie in space. And I said, so my story with my character being inspired. Oh, speaking of which, the tagline for Black Alpha that I have in USA Today is, what if you took the Batman story, sprinkled in some Iron Man tech and dropped it off in the middle of Star Wars? But I tell people if Star Wars is a space Western with samurai, mine's a space Western with superheroes. And the characters that I create too, are pretty much a reflection of myself. I make them relatable, but they all have a story. And the superhero myth part is they're usually orphans. I don't know if people realize that. Like if you take any comic book character that's famous, they're generally orphans. And I think what that represents is that, they almost have a harder beginning to their adventure, their journey, because they've lost a family member. That's probably the most tragic thing someone can think of, is losing a parent and being left alone in this world. So we already have kind of our compassion and relatability to these characters, Peter Parker, Bruce Wayne, even Superman. And then I think it sort of helps us kind of ride along with them on their journey, and we sort of get connected to them, and then we want to follow them on their story. Same thing with Luke Skywalker, basically same thing. He was kind of an orphan. But I was going to say the nerd part that I get in trouble with Star Wars real quick is that I don't believe Darth Vader was originally his father. Spoilers, by the way. I mean, for no one's never seen Star Wars, but you've had 40 years, so I don't feel too bad about that. So, but I'm saying that's an example where I think Star Wars took an interesting turn because George Lucas seemed to almost become more interested in the antagonist than the protagonist. And he made Anakin the protagonist. And that's kind of where the movie sort of fell apart because he wanted to justify a character who was a sweet little boy who, does horrible things as an adult. And so I always had like a philosophical problem with that. I told people, because they're like, well, it's interesting storytelling. I said, but for me, that would be like people getting really involved with a character like Batman. And he's on one particular path. And then for whatever reason, he goes on and becomes a mass murderer. I said, I don't understand that weird shift. I said, that's kind of, if you want to tell the story of a villain, I think that sometimes you can relate to how they got there. I don't know if you guys saw the Joker movie with.
I haven't seen that, but I heard it's really good. And I was just going to mention, I was going to mention the Joker as like the counteractive part to like Batman being good. Like what causes somebody to go down this path of doing bad things. There's usually, I always feel like our life, if you look at our life and you were to condense it down, our life is made up of split seconds, those little catalysts that like change or life changing and set us on a wholly different path. And in doing this podcast, we hear it all the time. And I know that you've experienced the same thing. I mean, if you've been on this earth long enough, you realize that, wow, you know, that was a pivotal part of my life right there. Like that totally changed my trajectory of where I was at. And I was in a totally different space. And I look back, and you probably do too, like I've lived different lifetimes. I was hanging out with different people, doing different stuff at different points in my life.
Yeah, I mean, well, I've mentioned it a couple of times. I keep saying milestones now because I've realized as I've gotten older that there are these chapters that were significant and pointed me sometimes in certain directions that sometimes, you know, we wish we could take back, but also recognizing that it's always going to be this. I think my biggest struggle I've had, and I've tried to kind of grapple with it more as an adult, is that growing up on comics and movies and television kind of being there in front of me, I think there's a bit of a security blanket, emotional one, because, you know, I'm one of those classic Trekkies, by the way. I've seen every episode of the original hundreds of times easily. And Star Trek seems to have that effect on a lot of the passionate fan base. Like they don't get tired of the stories. Like, you know what's going to happen, you know how it's going to turn out, but you still want to watch it. And maybe because there's a hint of security there, like I said, sort of like it's an antithesis of life. Where you're like, well, I know this is going to have a happy ending, even though things seem a little dire here. It's going to have a happy ending, you know, the 3-act structure of a story. That I was so kind of like entrenched in that world that as I became an adult, and you realize that's not how life works. So I've had to remind myself, you know, when you brought up the Joseph Campbell thing with the hero's journey, that when I do have a tough time in my life, I'm like, well, this is the movie of my life where this happens, or this is act 2 when things don't look so positive, you know. So I'm trying to still sort of take what storytelling means to me and realize that I'm like, I can still use it as a coping mechanism when we do have the emotional roller coaster of how life tends to work, you know. So, and of course, you know, with me being an older father now, you know, my daughter's a year and a half old, and I always tell people I'm her grandpa and dad all rolled into one. You know, by the time she's a teenager, I'm going to be 70 years old. So that'll be one of the biggest ones for me to learn to kind of adjust, you know, because I already have these worries like, well, what if she's getting into trouble at this age, or how is she going to think of me at my age? You know, here she is a girl in junior high and her dad looks like Santa Claus. I'm like, you know, how is that going to affect her? But I'm trying to really work on that this is all part of my story. Each one of us has a story on the time that we have, and have to sometimes honor that obviously there's things we can control and a lot of things we can't. And so right. I think that's probably been the biggest milestone for me currently, obviously being a new father, is that this whole next chapter with my daughter, I'm very protective of her, you know, but I'm going to learn a lot of lessons now too, myself, about what it means to be a parent and what I'm attempting to do with my life and the world that she now faces, you know, a lot different than the one I did. There's half century between us. So there's going to be a significant amount of changes in how we kind of behave and what we're taught. So,
but you bring something totally different than like a person that has a kid when they're in their 20s too, because you have all that life experience. Now, whether or not they listen to it or not is a whole different deal. But I almost think that, you know, I had kids a little bit older, not as old as yourself, but I think it makes a difference, you know, and what you bring to the table. And I think you're more apt as a dad and being an older father to talk to your kid in more like realistic terms, like being honest with your children. You know, you don't sugarcoat it. You kind of just get to the meat of the situation and talk it out. And I think they're better for it.
One interesting thing too I've thought about from time to time, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this documentary. It's called Trek Nation. It was done with Gene Roddenberry's son. It's very interesting because he talks about, actually they were in a very similar boat. Gene Roddenberry was 53 when his son was born, and he passed away from a heart attack at 70 years old. So his son was 17. And the documentary that his son states at the beginning was that he goes, there's two kinds of people in this world. There's people who get Star Trek and what it's all about, and people who just don't get it. And he goes, and I just didn't get it. So then he introduces himself. I'm the son of the creator of Star Trek. And he said, I had no interest in it as a kid. He said, so I kind of decided to make this documentary because I wanted to kind of get to know my father better. And also, why do people feel this way about a TV show? It was interesting, and it's a very, very, I highly recommend it if you get a chance to watch it. Like I said, Trek Nation. But he pretty much talks about how his father creating something that's became so famous put him in a really weird spot because, and probably like a lot of people who are the kids of famous people, like what their public persona and what they represent, the kids sometimes, you know, they get the intimate view where, you know, the parent's not up on a pedestal. And he got to appreciate his father through the fans of something he was resentful about, probably because his dad was busy working all the time. And then when you're in the public eye, the public shares you with your family. So there's always a resentment that goes on. Leonard Nimoy's son also did a documentary with a very similar tone, also very interesting, that, you know, I want what I'm doing to sort of be different for my daughter, you know, because I mean, I can't help but want to bring these characters to life that have been around Black Alpha I created when I was 11 years old in grade school, and then I've had other ones in my teen years, and even up till the last several months that I'll have a new idea that'll pop in my head. That I want these characters to represent a legacy for my daughter, but I also want her to understand she's obviously number one. You know, those characters and everything that I do, all these endeavors, they're always going to be behind her. You know, the legacy that I want to, I guess, leave for her is that if these characters ever do take off, she can benefit from that, you know, like from an estate kind of thing, you know, that I leave behind. But also, the message I want to sort of send to her is, you know, expect the best and try to get there. Even though it's not easy, go after your dreams, you know, go after your ambitions, and also, you know, kindness and love, obviously. But, you know, those are the things. So when I approach what I do, and I'd mentioned maybe not earlier that I'm having this documentary film made about me, that's what the whole narrative of the documentary is. Being my age, trying to keep my head in the game with dealing with Hollywood and some of their nonsense and trying to get these things off the ground, and also being a father and what that represents to my daughter. Because obviously the game has changed having a kid. You know, when it was just me wanting to do this stuff, I think I had a little more like, well, I'll do whatever it takes mentality. Yeah. And sometimes my health is sacrificed, and I'm getting that back on track. But a number of things were sacrificed. But I'm like, my time and quality with her, I mean, that's not going to happen. So I have to kind of figure out how to maneuver around this new landscape of being a dad. And like I said, that's what I want the memory of her to have, is because, you know, I have a little plushie made of one of my characters. You know, that's supposed to be a toy for her. We've had to put it up because, you know, she's kind of trying to tear it apart and all that, but because it's a custom. But I don't want to like just barrage of all my stuff like being in her life. I want her, if she's into it, she'll be into it on her own. But I just want her to realize that, you know, this is something that Dad did, and it wasn't always easy. And, you know, and she actually inspired me in a way to drive it even harder because like I said, because of the legacy that I want to leave for her, not just for myself.
So you created a couple of your characters when you were pretty young, mm-hmm. and then you have new characters. How has the process changed as far as the development of them?
When I created them as a kid, I would do some drawings, and then having a very fertile imagination, like they started out as a couple, then several. I would have to say roughly now, altogether, I've got over 20 something. And so I don't have the time to sit there and go, well, you know, like an image will form in my head. So I don't get to draw them out as much because there's so many of them. And like I said, and also now because of my lifestyle, like I don't have as much time to draw as I did when I was younger. And I will sometimes, like lately on Facebook this year, I've actually taken at least 7 of my characters and done kind of a comic book style cover for them, what they look like, and see what the audience thinks when I do logos for them and all that. Technology has helped because now with Photoshop, I can throw something together pretty quick as opposed to the old school way where you had to sit there and kind of like the way things were done with print, with how you lay down the lettering, the typography, graphics, and all that. That it's a lot quicker that way. Or if you want to do an animation, you know, if you have the time, you can grab some animation program and do like a little quick test of a scene. You know, that part is fun. Because I do think about that when I'm like, because I tend to do a lot of drawing now on my Cintiq, which is a big flat screen monitor tablet that, you know, you can draw and paint Photoshop, that I can get these things done. And it looks like I had a little team behind me that created like any of this promotional material. So that part is pretty cool and fun. But yeah, like I said, the biggest, and this is the part sometimes can be a curse, is that I have all these characters in my head that each one of them has a universe they live in, and they have a personality. And they're all like fighting for corners of my brain, you know, and I've had to kind of learn which ones do I want to get out there, you know. And unfortunately, the older I get, I've kind of realized I probably won't have time to do all of them, you know. So that was a pretty emotional, wrenching thing for me when I realized that several years ago, where I'm like, in my brain, I'm still kind of 16, but what I have left for the years, you know, I'm not going to be able to I guess on my own anyway, have the resources to get them done. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that some of it has changed, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And some of it has changed for the better, and some of it hasn't changed at all, you know, because some people say, well, where do you come up with ideas for characters? And I'm like, honestly, I do not know. There'll be like, we had dinner at my sister's house a week ago, and one of my brother's ex-girlfriends works, she started out as a cop. She became a lawyer. Now she's both a lawyer and a cop. And I said, that's a TV show right there. That's something I could see on the ABC channel with Nathan Fillion starring.
Totally different spin on something.
Where she has to balance her life of catching criminals, but also, you know, defending them when they go to, you know, that's how it happens sometimes for me. Or there'll be something that, I know a lot of people hate the Twilight movies out there, but I actually have a character that was born out of a line in one of those Twilight movies where the girl was trying to figure out what he was, and she brought up radioactive spider bite and kryptonite or something. So I'm like, I should totally take a vampire story and twist it into a superhero story. So there'll be something like that where I'll just be like, here's how it happened. And my brain won't shut off. Like I said, it still continues to do that to this day. So then I got to sit there and kind of, I have a couple of little notebooks where I have things, kind of a log of the ones I come up with, and I'll write so that I don't forget, even though my memory's still pretty good. But I'm like, well, this is what this one is about. But sometimes I kind of also let out a big sigh because I'm just like going, oh, another one. It sounds exhilarating and draining all at the same time, because I'm like, here's another story that I just wish I had the time to tell, and I may not.
So you're constantly coming up with new characters, some of which you will maybe see the light of day, or you write them down, or you develop them a little bit. But your two main characters are Black Alpha and then Salem Tusk, correct?
Yeah, currently, yes.
Okay. Talk a little bit about where each one of those characters are in their development. Like, what are you trying to do with each one of those currently?
Well, Black Alpha is the one I mentioned, was optioned 3 different times in the last several years with Hollywood as a goal to make it. One was a live action movie, and the other 2 were animation projects. And once again, for the uninitiated, the way this tends to work is you'll see, especially in this day and age, like any of the Hollywood trades, there'll be a big announcement that some studio decided to pick up the rights to like a young adult novel, comic books, whatever the case is, even based on an article. That doesn't mean that every single one of those things you read in the trades is going to happen, because there's so many sophisticated components when it comes to production. Financing falls apart, a number of things. An actor committed, decided he didn't want to do it. So that's the other thing, like I said, I've had to learn the hard way. So in Black Alpha's case, it's given me some validation that it's been optioned more than once by Hollywood, where they can see the potential. And also I do think that's because I've created a lot of concept art for it and merchandise materials, and I've done like what would it look like on a baseball cap or a T-shirt? Because I figured, well, at the time anyway, I'm like, this is how I'm going to get the investors in if I show them, because they don't care if it's the greatest story in the world. They just want to know, how am I going to do a return on investment? How am I going to make my money back? And I'm
how
like,
can you monetize it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is how we should do it. But the market shifts so quickly now too, because like I said, it's Batman in space. And unless I make it a really weird animation style, or it's got some weird ironic quirkiness to the way that the stories are done, or just outright weird, like Adventure Time or any of that kind of stuff, I'm like, they don't seem as interested if it's a straight action thing. But that could change in 6 months to a year. Because I know that, like, and the stuff you'll run into is if you pitch it as, well, it's Batman meets Star Wars, or, Batman and Iron Man, there's a lot of producers out there that'll be like, we already got those.
Right.
And so, that's another thing that I kind of, because, years ago when Star Wars first came out, everyone wanted another Star Wars. There were a lot of imitators. Well, nowadays, the market is almost the opposite, where people feel like, well, and like you said, a lot of them, they're pretty privy to the fact that there's so many, it's a big risk behind the scenes, because there's going to just, certain things seem like they should be hit with an audience, they just don't land. And like you said, that's because of all the attention. And also, the kids' tastes have changed too over the years, right? Compared to when we were all younger. So there's a lot of factors to be considered. But getting back on where Black Alpha is at, is that my focus currently is to get this comic miniseries wrapped up, because I'm like, you don't want to admit it, but there's a distinct possibility it may never be a cartoon series or a film. In fact, people I know who are well-known names in the comic industry have had their comics optioned numerous times, and they kind of have that attitude. Like, I just count on it not happening. And it's tough because, when you're goal-driven, you don't want to really feel like you go there completely, because then it almost feels like you've given up. Well, I don't expect anything to happen. And that's been a real tough one for me too, to, because I'll have my moods where I'm feeling good about stuff, and other ones that's kind of where, as a human being, you're tempted to go like, well, I might as well just kind of throw in the towel on this, put it on the shelf. It's just not going to happen. And so I've had to readjust my thinking, like I said earlier, where I'm like, well, obviously I can't, unless I'm independently wealthy, I cannot control a TV show or movie project getting made for this particular character. What can I do with a little help through Kickstarter or something like that? I can at least maybe get help to get the comic done, and it'll still be done, and then there'll be an audience that can read it. The Salem Tusk project was kind of an oddly opposite version of that, where I only had one piece of poster art, which I still have. And I belong to this group. A guy named James Neil Broda starts a group called The Advisor, where he brings in anyone, singers, actors, directors, filmmakers, in my case, comic book artists. And he brings them together as kind of a networking sort of community. And one day I shared a drawing of Salem Tusk. He saw that, and paying Bishop Stevens, the former WWE wrestler, He's been in The Walking Dead. He's been in that show, Chicago PD. He just filmed an episode recently. He saw this, pinged him in it, and him and I had a conversation on the phone call, hit it off immediately, and then he was like, let's try and develop. So we've been trying to do it together as an independent project. Now, some of the things him and I have currently run into is that it's really, really hard to find, unless you're making a horror film, because they're very inexpensive to produce. And since all my stuff tends to be more fantasy, sci-fi-ish based, right away somebody gets scared because they're like, well, it's going to need a large budget to do this correctly. Salem Tusk is steampunk, so it's the same kind of thing where, we want to make it for $500,000. That's our projected budget, but we're still having a hard time finding financiers that, even if there's several of them, they don't want to donate $50,000 or whatever because they think, well, I'm not going to make any money off of that, or how are you going to turn this into something? And also, steampunk hasn't really been proven yet as a viable moneymaker anyway. But see, I don't think of that stuff when I'm creating things. I don't, like I said, that's more film by committee mentality where I'm going to, like you said, I'm going to follow a trend. Instead, I'm like, this is the world, this character. I created it this way. And I've had some friends in Hollywood tell me, like, I think you're talented at what you do, but hey, I feel for you because I think you are going to have a hard time because you're creating projects that honestly probably need $100 million budget. And
wow.
Unless anyone's ever heard of you or you have previous success, they're not going to take the risk, So right now, Salem Tusk is currently on hold while we kind of figure out our next plan to still maybe kind of get our funding. Because we have a studio and a director attached to it. They're offering almost $250,000 in equity. That's not like actual money, but the equity in the project. That's half the budget right there. And we were trying to do a Indiegogo fundraiser, but we didn't get a lot of money like we'd hoped for our goal. So sometimes you have to regroup and figure out, well, what's our plan moving forward? And that's kind of where we're at with that one. Now, I will say that a few of my other characters also have been taken a look at in the last several months by other Hollywood producers. There's 3 other ones. But, that's also one of those, like, the producer requested it and then they show it to somebody and the person goes no. So that's also going to be kind of based on timing. So that's why, like I said, it can be frustrating because I don't just have one thing I'm trying to do. I have several.
And multiple irons in the fire trying to make something.
And they're always at different,
stages.
Yeah, and of interest. And so I've had to kind of, like I said, learn to let that go and focus also on what my daily reality is. Because, if you're new at this, I think that it can drive you a little batty where you get excited. Like the kid in you, like, oh, wow, Hollywood's taking an interest in what I'm doing. Here's, I can't wait till opening night and the red carpet, so you get this first thing like this is going to happen. But then as the years go by, you're kind of going, well, okay. And especially, ironically, there have been times where I'm just like, I got to think about my health. I got to think about my age. I just think it's time, I'm getting signs from the universe. It's just time to let this go. And every time that I do that, then there's something that like, oh, so-and-so producer thought this was really cool. He wants to talk to you about it. So I've learned that seems to be kind of how it goes. And so that's where I'm kind of keeping my emotions in check is that, when I do get to that place, I'm like, well, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your daughter, and you owe it to the people out there who've been following what you're doing to at least see one of these things done in some form. You took the risk of getting it out there. You have people that are interested that have actually been very patient, to see a completed comic miniseries. I at least owe it to them, and then if anything else happens, then I'll be pleasantly surprised. Because I have found out doing a lot of reading and listening to podcasts and other things that anything that becomes famous that we're familiar with, like Star Wars, doesn't matter. They were incredibly lucky to get there. There's just the things that fell into place in the right manner. Otherwise, they could have, gone south as well and not gotten off the ground. So anyway, with that being said, I realized that, you have to work a little bit harder and I guess kind of find a balance in there, like where I'm not throwing in the towel, but I'm also not going to sit there and have my head in the clouds about what my expectations are either.
So when Hollywood options a series like what you're talking, is there any money involved in that? Or is it just like, hey, we're interested and we want to hold it and just in case to actually make it into fruition?
It really depends. Years ago, back in the 90s, when comics were really kind of blowing up back then, and then, that was kind of, I think, an age where studios, sometimes smaller ones, wanted to be a part of something to have the next Superman or Spider-Man or whatever. There was significant money paid. Sometimes they'd pay people 6 figures to buy the rights. And then after a while, option money tends to be, if you're with a bigger studio, it's usually like 10 grand. But these smaller ones, you get $1.
Yeah.
It's called the dollar option. And more so, I think it's, and I've done a few of those where I'm like, well, I'm not as concerned about the money right now. Maybe this opportunity will lead somewhere. That's the investment. But I kind of promised myself I don't really want to do those anymore because, to be fair, if somebody gets like, say, a book or comic and a studio like Paramount comes along and options it for $10,000, it's nice for them to have that money, after taxes are taken out. But there's no guarantee that that's going to get made either.
But then they own it, right?
For a certain period of time.
Okay, so it's time based.
Yeah, for years it was 3 years. Nowadays it's probably sometimes 6 months to a year and a half. And during that time, what they're doing is they enter in a partnership where they're like, and it's some guy calling himself a producer. Sometimes that term can be loose, but it basically boils down to somebody has a desire that sees the merit in what you're doing, and they're going to try and get the components and resources, but that's no guarantee for them either. Right. It's just basically a way of saying, like, during this time, this is taken off the table. I'm going to invest my time and maybe whatever I have to get this to a certain point. And you get contracts, you have to, I tell people always have some sort of legal counsel because a lot of people will get screwed over if you don't. And just in that small percentage, something does take off that, you don't want to get screwed over. And we live in a weird time where, like, with the exception of the Image Comics boom in the early 90s, comic creators have been screwed over left and right, oddly enough. For, the guys that created Superman were pretty much destitute most of their life. And, and the corporations don't want to do the right thing because they think that sets a precedent that other people will be coming after them expecting more money. So I've always tried to be smarter about that stuff where I'm like, whatever contracts I sign, I don't want to be screwed over, especially, like I said, once again, because for my daughter, I want to leave her some compensation if I'm able, when I leave this world and stuff. So, but like I said, all this stuff has been a learning experience for me. I mean, I've read about some of it, I think, but until you actually go through it, that's obviously a whole different kind of education. So I'm still learning all the time.
Yeah.
So I love these, and I don't know a ton about them, but I love both these characters that you've developed, Black Alpha and Salem Tusk. The one that I really want to see is Salem Tusk. Like, that I can relate to, and it's so different than what's out there and what I see all the time. We were having a conversation, Wes and I, yesterday, or maybe it was this morning, but anyway, I was talking about movies that I've seen. I haven't seen any superhero movies in the last year and a half probably, because I'm bored with it. But Salem Tusk, and I want you to tell our audience what he's all about. But the artwork is amazing. The concept is amazing. And that's something I would go watch because I think that it's deeper than the regular superhero scenario.
And so before you go there, so what I'm tired of, and maybe if I was had a successful line of comics or whatever, I'd feel differently, but it's the same characters over and over and over, and I just get kind of tired of, like, Hollywood. It always appears like Hollywood is just repurposing the same stories and the same characters. And, that's what kind of bores me about the superhero thing. It's always the same superheroes, but having a fresh one like Salem's Tusk would be really fun, and it is a little different. So sorry, I just wanted to put that out there.
And before I continue, just to, I'll talk about Salem Tusk in a second, but I agree. In fact, people get a little surprised when I say this, that since I've been a huge fan of movies, I've loved all kind of movies my whole life, and I miss the era where there was a rom-com, that was coming out, or a period piece, drama, thriller. That even me, I've kind of gotten over as much as I love superheroes, I'm kind of tired of seeing those movies. But they become such a huge investment for the companies that, I think that sometimes, this is theory on my part, but, if you condition people, Pavlovian conditioning almost, they will kind of start to respond like a lemming, And I think that there are certain story beats in those films that kids, it's like a video game come to life for them. And I think that the storytelling end of it has suffered because they're, like you said, it's usually the same formula. And of course, anyone in the business world is like, well, we have a successful formula. We will just keep repeating that formula until the audience gets tired of whatever that product is. That's why I said for me, I create partially based upon what I love. And, Salem Tusk, well, the premise is that in the late 19th century, that there was a secret alliance, a covert organization between the British people and the United States created CI6. So it's a clandestine organization of operatives that pretty much protect the world in the steampunk era. And for people who don't know, steampunk is like a sci-fi, generally set in the Victorian age. We've seen versions of it, maybe not realized, like the Jules Verne stories.
Isn't Hellboy a little bit steampunk?
Yeah, that's definitely.
And I love those movies
I
because
love
those are like really phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah. And like the characters in my story, the agents for CI6, like they face off against anything like vampires and werewolves. And maybe we played around with the idea that Jack the Ripper, because it's set in the same era, maybe he turned out to be some sort of a creature or monster, which is why he wasn't caught. Steam-powered robots, so there's definitely kind of that, almost, and in my case, almost like a sci-fi Western, because some of it has like a Western feel. But Salem Tusk is the leader of these agents, and he's African-American. And so that's a little unique too,
Yeah.
And I tell people, I said that the first image I had of him, and I did a lot of walking back and forth to school, which is where some of these ideas came. And I love the artwork of Frank Frazetta, who had done,
I'm a huge fan of him.
Yeah. And I had this image one day, it was probably based on some of the paintings I'd seen, but all of a sudden out of the blue, and it was snowy outside, I'm walking, and I had this image of a muscular black warrior riding a big woolly mammoth. And I think that's where the tusk came from in his name. And that just kind of stuck in my head. And then not too long after that, Raiders of the Lost Ark came out. And I think that I wanted to do like kind of that sort of an adventure story, something that took place in the past, but had supernatural, the same kind of thing. Like it's kind of high adventure taking place in jungle temples, but there's a supernatural, like otherworldly part to it. And so when I first started drawing pictures of him, he had different costumes, but he was just a black character, and I think that what has happened now is that that's sort of become a thing, trying to include diversity, like with Black Panther taking off. So when Bishop and I met, I said, I like the fact that the character was created. It's not, because I come from the Star Trek school of thought, once again, obviously, where I'm like, the characters, it's the strength of character has nothing to do with their ethnic background, because in Star Trek, you got purple aliens running around and Spock. And the whole multicultural aspect of the bridge crew. I said, maybe that's where I learned some of that from, but I'm like, it's cool if you want to throw that out there, being proud of some of your, your heritage. But I said, at the end of the day, a person is a strong person, has strong character. I don't care if they're Asian or blue or yellow, it doesn't matter. That's and so my characters are kind of created that way, male or female, kid or adult. It's about who are they underneath all that stuff, So I told Bishop that I felt good that, I wasn't trying to follow a trend like, well, right now, black heroes are, you can hear some production meeting, some exec.
Yes.
This is what the kids are into. I said, my character's always been that way.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's just, it is who he is. And you happen to be a big, tough looking African-American guy. And also that wants to play him. But, I think too, because Bishop, a lot of times, because of his appearance and what he's done, he does get cast as the heavy quite a bit. Usually if someone's big bodyguard or because of his size. And I think he was really attracted to the notion that this is a positive hero, and also the whole family kind of a thing,
Right.
And so that's where we kind of had hoped, having that edge, that people would view it, like you said, as something a little different. But once again, we're in a very risk adverse market. So I don't think people kind of picked up on that stuff as much as, two things that I hear a lot is, looks cool, sounds cool, never heard of it, never heard of you. And so the conversations kind of tend to stop there.
But me as a visual artist, like when I read the description of this character and then I saw the artwork, because the artwork is phenomenal.
Well, thank you once again.
I thought, well, this is a really cool concept. Like I can totally visualize this. This is already a movie I want to go see. Like I'm interested in this because it has the steampunk thing, because it has all these different characters that work together as a team, and they're multicultural, and they have their different virtues, and to accomplish their goal or their mission, they have to work together, right? Mm-hmm. It has all the elements that I think that Hollywood would like, but obviously, I'm just one guy saying this, and it's always about the trend, and especially this day and age, it's like what sells. I love the Indiana kind of Jones aspect of it. There's just a multitude of, he's multidimensional. And I love, growing up, Batman and especially Spider-Man were my favorite comics. I love those two characters. And it's probably the era that we grew up in. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't a huge comic book reader mm-hmm. of comic books. I didn't go to the comic store, but I'd pick one up occasionally and I'd be like, oh, or a friend would give me one. And so that's how I got into, the little bit of comics that I did. And back in the day, you could go, they would have like comic, like sales or trading things set up where you'd go to a gym and it would be chock full of comics, and you could, there's just racks and racks of comics, which was like a really cool experience at the time. Do they even do anything like that anymore?
No, that's kind of become a hot topic lately because comics were taken out of the grocery. I got them in the supermarket, the grocery stores. Yeah. The direct market kicked in probably in the very late 70s, early 80s, and that's pretty much how you get your comics now. There was a period where that was a very booming business, but since that's happened and the company that has that system in place, they don't want to let go of that monopoly, right? But I think that there was a disservice because, here's the dilemma currently. Millions of kids will go see the Avengers in a movie. They have no interest in getting a comic book. This is my theory, and I've said this before. When you were a kid, comics could do what films can't. Now it's in reverse, right? Because I think that the art form is very quaint for kids. I think that's why the sales have suffered. Plus now, like we said earlier, they've got video games to compete with, and they're on these TikTok and Snapchat, a lot of different things that they're on. I think that the combination of that and the fact that they were taken out of the grocery store and things like that where anyone could get them did hurt the market because there's not the exposure there. I'm not saying that there's probably not an occasional younger person and with a lot of influence from their parents that go into a comic book store and say, oh, hey, you really seem to like Hellboy. Let's go get a Hellboy comic. I think it happens, but not in a, the most significant way that it should or could. So I think that also, that's why I said earlier, I was kind of downplaying me getting my comic series done for Black Alpha because I'm like, well, there isn't going to be a huge audience to read these. And, that's something I have to kind of keep telling myself, even if it's not a huge market, at least somebody will be interested in reading it and that's good. But yeah, I think that's where things have fallen apart. I don't know if it's ever going to recover.
You don't think it'll be cyclic? Like vinyl and music. Like vinyl has made this huge comeback now and everybody wants it.
I think there's a very small potential, but right now I would say probably not. And because I know in the past decades there was the worry comics are going to die, like vaudeville. And everyone said, oh, they came back around, but I'm like, but not with the current age of technology we have. There's too much, back then television was the one distraction. It's one distraction. Like now you have 100. So I said that's where I feel like, unfortunately, I hope I'm wrong, obviously, but I don't think so, at least anywhere in the near future.
So now we have this long form storytelling where even like Netflix, because you can binge watch and you can have a superhero series and watch 10 episodes in a row and they tell the long story. I think, even movies are feeling kind of that little bit of they're being hurt a little bit because Netflix is able to do these series and kids my son loves watching The Punisher. Mm-hmm. He loved that series. So now we have this long form mode of storytelling. That's probably hurting the comic industry as well, I imagine. But what about graphic novels?
Well, I was just going to go there. Dang you. Always stealing my thunder. Yeah. Because that's relatively new, right, Todd? Or
that's been around for a little while, but I have a son that is definitely he has zero interest in reading a book. Like there's no way you could get him to sit down and read a book. But if I bring home, and he won't look for him himself, but if I bring home a graphic novel and give it to him, he'll eat it up. He loves graphic novels and he loves, because it is kind of a long form of storytelling, because it's more of a book type of thing with pictures, that he'll sit down and gobble up.
And I even bought a graphic novel of Smedley Butler, who was a Commandant of the Marine Corps who won 2 Medal of Honors. And it was a graphic novel. It was just like, what is this? So obscure, but I thought that was an interesting idea. But I was going to, we're right on the same wavelength. The advent of graphic novels kind of changed maybe comic books, didn't it? Or was it kind of a parallel development?
Well, I think that, the graphic novel for the most part sort of came into being in the mid to late 80s. We also call them trade paperbacks. There's some projects that were designed. It's a very European idea because they're kind of respected and done very differently over like in the Asian market and European, where you're treated like a famous novelist. And usually you have the resources and probably like an advance to create something that's 100 pages in length or 150 to 100. Here, there are certain opportunities for artists that do that. And I think that there was also a kind of a prestige. People started saying, well, based on the world best-selling graphic novel, now they do say a comic book. But I think that that's also kind of been something being discussed in the market, is that because of the attention span. And like you said, the binge age that we live in, people want to get they want to be able to sit there and flip through 80 to 100 something pages to get it done then and there. Like even for me, Black Alpha, the company that I'm having the comic published through, It's supposed to be 4 issue miniseries. And the way that I have these structured is that each miniseries is basically its own movie. So it'll fairly be wrapped up by issue 4, but if it's successful and they want to see another one, then the second miniseries would be the second film. That when all the 4 issues are published and are out, then they will be put in a trade paperback. And so some people will tell me that, well, I'll read it when the trade is done. There's still a few older people in the market that like to get like their monthly fix, or if it comes out, quarterly or whatever the case is. But I do think a lot of things have changed. Graphic novels is one of them. And like you said, like your son, I didn't read a lot of books when I was a kid. I just, my brain was not wired that way. I wanted to get visual information along with a script. And so I think graphic novels are good that way. But ironically, what you mentioned about films and like the streaming stuff, cable, is that like films have now very much narrowed in their focus of the stories that are being told. Superheroes or Star Wars. But comics and graphic novels and even Netflix and things like that, there's a huge variety of different kind of stories that are being told. And that is, to me, one of the beautiful things about the comic book genre or the format of storytelling is you can do it about anything. It just depends on the creator, right? You can tell like some historical drama if you want to, or you can do the most outlandish video game style thing, and that's where I think that there's strengths in those mediums. And some people, they'll say that too, like, well, I prefer to, because, I don't know if you remember this years ago, but if you did anything that was considered television related, that was the death knell of your career. Like, you were a movie producer.
You were done.
Yeah, but nowadays the best form of storytelling is done on what is basically television shows on the internet. And comics are also that too, because I've seen, and I personally know some creators who have had their comics turned into movies and television shows that, they're excited that, because by the real quick, when that does happen, let's just say for a second, a Black Alpha movie or cartoon or anything takes off and that, like whoever company optioned it, I pretty much will have no involvement. They get rid of the creator almost immediately. I won't have any say so, because I'm not bringing basically the skin in the game to the table where I have all the financial resources. So that's another reason why the comic, I've had to remind myself my comic is important. And that's kind of what I have in my contracts, is that the comic is off limits to them. Like I create my version of that story in the comic. I know Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy, and he talks about that from time to time, that even though I enjoyed those movies, that's Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy. His is the comic version. That will always be. So whatever is different, that way he can kind of separate himself from getting frustrated and, what have they done to my creation? He just views it as its own entity. And so that's kind of how I view like my story. If somebody came along and wanted to make a Black Alpha movie, chances are they're going to change a bunch of stuff. I have no control over that, but I do have the comic. What was frustrating about Salem Tusk thus far is that since it's a much smaller production, Bishop and I actually have a partnership and LLC with that project so that we're pretty much in charge.
Nice.
And that's why we're still hoping it does take off so that we can have that, even with, we know we'll lose a little bit of that if we bring in, several financiers and all that. But I'm saying it's not like a huge budget where it becomes this monstrous thing that you're just kind of get swallowed up in. Anyway, I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here.
That's good. This is all good information, because I don't think a lot of people don't know the ins and outs, and you've been, you've gotten to see this on the front lines for a number of years now. So it's very interesting. And I want to see a Salem Tusk Netflix series. That's what I want to see. Because my son got me into The Mandalorian, and I thought, I'm not even interested, but I'll sit down and watch an episode. I'll give it an episode, right? I was totally sucked in. Like now I'm like, I can't wait till the second season rolls around. I want to see a Salem Tusk. Netflix, if you're listening, I want to see a Salem Tusk series. Like seriously, I would watch that.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because I will say this, that, separating me being kind of the birth mother of these things, as a fan, I think there's that part of my brain that even if I didn't create some of these things, I want to see them. I would like to see them as a fan. And I know that, and I will say this, I won't give all the details away, but roughly about a year ago at this time, for about a month or so, until everything fell apart, we actually had a partnership with a couple of people that their company had a slate of numerous projects. Salem Tusk was actually on there for a budget of $20 million. And it was for 3 films. It was going to be a trilogy, and they were supposed to be filmed in England and in Spain. Unfortunately, and I'm not going to, like I said, there's some unscrupulous people you got to deal with, and you find out that some financing people don't have the financing that they're talking about, which is why that fell apart. But we've always kind of envisioned it, because if people say, well, when that looked like it was going in that direction, people say, well, I want a ticket to the movie theater. And I'm like, it won't play in a movie theater. And most things don't play in a movie theater now, unless you're Disney. I said, so like when people say, what do you envision this as? Black Alpha was always an animation project. I mean, if somebody could do a live action, cool. If they could do a good job. But Salem Tusk, I've always envisioned as something on Netflix. Ever since we shot those trailers last year.
Disney Plus or Amazon Prime, any of those.
Any of those things, exactly. And so we had kind of, for a while, we were promoting it as a TV series until we decided to go to the route that we thought might be easier to make a 90-minute independent feature instead of a series. But that's what the idea was initially, was something you could do on streaming where you have like 10 episodes or something. So yes, I appreciate you saying that, because I would love to see that too. But like I said, it's a very rough business, and and I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but it just blows my mind how many poor decisions are made. That, in an intelligence level, there's none. And it's an archaic system too that still kind of seems to sort of.
That's what I've heard.
The politics of it are just weird to me, because I'm like, don't you want to? I mean, honestly, don't most of you guys want to make money? And
don't you want to make money, and don't you want to tell great stories?
Exactly. That's why I said Pixar's proven they can do it, and even Marvel. As much as, like I said, those movies are getting a little stale, Marvel found a winning formula. And I think for the most part, especially at the beginning, they learned how to tell good, engaging stories that were for the whole family, and they're fun, and they get people involved in the conversation. But then there's these other projects that, because so-and-so's nephew knows somebody. They didn't do their due diligence, to say, well, is this even worth investing in? And like I said, it's just weird how, or if something really flops, I'm going, there's 20 things wrong with this movie, and I could tell you why it flopped. But you guys are scratching your head going, why did this film flop? And I'm like, that's the silliness that has always been frustrating to me. And like I said, I'm not an expert, but if anyone gave me the time, I'm like, I could go through a list of 20 projects and could tell you why the ones landed with an audience and why the ones didn't. And I take that same approach with my own work. Like, when people ask me, like, the material that I do, can the whole family watch it? And I'm like, yeah, because that's how I grew up, My dad took, at the time, there were 6 siblings, but there were 5 of us. He took us to Star Wars when it came out. I watched Star Trek at 4 years old, starting with, like I said, with my mom and dad. Everything that I create, I want to be family viewing. It doesn't mean that I don't have an interest in telling a little more of a mature story that I want to do, but I'm like, I also view it as something with commercial viability is also something you should consider if you feel like you're going to make money off of it. The more eyes that see it, because I know one of the things being talked about is that Harley Quinn movie just came out, and they're predicting it to be a flop. So right away they're like, oh, superhero fatigue films are setting in. That could be a little truth, but it turned out, I guess it's an R-rated film. And when she made her appearance in the Suicide Squad movie, which was PG-13, they already shut out some of their market by making it an R-rated film. Right. Because not every mom's going to go, oh yeah, we'll go see it. And the character's also been in numerous cartoons, and, speaking of which, that's a whole other opinion I have, is that everyone feels like, in order for it to be good, after Deadpool and Logan, that there also needs to be R-rated comic book films. And I'm like, that has nothing to do with it, but somebody gets in their head that, well, if we make it R, that gives it some grittiness and edge, and therefore people are going to think the product is better. And see, like I said, there's another harsh lesson there. They're going to lose money in this movie, and they shouldn't have made it rated R for the supposed market that they were trying to reach, so.
At Christmas, I bought a couple graphic novels for my son, and I went to Barnes & Noble because, well, it was easy to get to, and I knew that they had graphic novels, and I was surprised when I got there. I was like, holy moly. There's like 2 like full-on rows of graphic novels, and the vast majority of it, actually I was a little frustrated because the vast majority, I'm not into the whole anime thing, and I know my son isn't either, but the vast majority was the anime stuff. And I'm not even going to pretend to understand it. It just doesn't interest me. Maybe I should give it a chance. But I wanted like more of a superhero or some kind of story graphic novel. You said that these things are big. Obviously, there's a segment of the population that reads them, but it's big in Asia and in Europe. Mm-hmm. Have you tried to pitch any of your stuff to the European market at all?
Yeah, no. I mean, I've had a couple of people and I've had a couple of agents through the years. I don't have representation at the moment, but usually that's their job. Like a lot of, when you're in a band, you have an agent and they kind of get you the gigs at the bar as well. Actors have an agent that tries to get them auditions. And even what I do, you have someone representing as a content or IP creator to try and pitch your material to different people. I had a guy that was going to pitch it to England because they tend to like sci-fi, but, they turned it down. As far as the Asian market goes, I actually have, especially on the Black Alpha end, I like to do these these drawings, these pieces of art that shows like character design. Like if it has strength, it should be able to translate to any style, whether or not it's realistic or hyper cartoony. And so I have an anime version of Black Alpha. I don't have any direct context there yet to do that, because at the time, and even the story sort of lends itself, because I'm like telling people it's not straight up superhero. Some of the concept actually lends itself to a lot of what anime, especially the characters that get inside the huge robots and they have a connection to the robot and then they fight these monsters. I said, there's some elements in my story. These guys don't operate a huge robot, but they operate this suit that they have kind of a symbiotic relationship with. So to me, the philosophy or the concept would be probably fit something they would do. Because like I said, it's not straight on superhero, but it also boils down to I just haven't made the right connections to do that. Because a lot of times you can't just pitch. You can't do like a cold call version of like, get someone's information and say, usually they won't look at it, obviously. And music executives, like they don't want to get accused of basically stealing whatever you're sending them. So a lot of times you have to have representation for them to even look, they don't take solicitation. So it's things I've thought about. I just haven't really made that deep kind of impact yet to kind of pitch it to a different market, So like I said, more stuff that I'm always learning the hard way.
And it evolves, like you said earlier, that it's evolving so quickly. And technology is such a huge part of that. And it's changing not only the creative industry, but all industries as a whole. Social media, I know that you utilize it for your promotion. We've already talked about that. What platforms do you utilize for promoting your different characters in your work?
Mainly Facebook. I know I've been told, here's the other thing too, it's a little tidbit of information people don't know about me. I actually have a minor form of cerebral palsy. So typing is very difficult. I have to,
hunt and peck.
Yeah, I can't even do it. It's a one finger operation. Trish has helped out sometimes posting, before we had Ari out, she was helping out with my social media, like getting on my Instagram and my Twitter. But yeah, I think the reason I do Facebook so much is that there's such an instantaneous response. And I feel that once again, there's more of a personal connection there as opposed to, because people are saying, well, you really need to do Twitter. And I guess that's the other thing. I don't really understand the appeal of Twitter, except that it's another thing to kind of just, get a little bite of information out there that you can type in one sentence. And unfortunately, you used to be able to have websites too. And I've totally neglected having a website for years because I've just kind of gotten in this habit of using Facebook for everything. But I have considered probably building a couple of new websites, maybe almost one where it's a Tom Rasch website and then all my projects are on there. A little store if people want to order, merchandise or prints, and also the status of where I'm at. That's something I'm considering. But yeah, currently it's always still Facebook. Like the Twitter is actually set up under Black Alpha. So maybe that's only got about 400 followers. And I think it's because it's not really about me. I mean, we share stuff, but it was supposed to be Black Alpha related. So that really hasn't gained any traction. And once that happened, I kind of lost interest in trying to, because there's a lot of work too, trying to build your audience. I mean, that's the part that's tough for me is there are days where I'm just like, I had a very long day at work and I don't feel like doing this tonight. And some days I kind of talk myself into it, so that's been a tough thing. But also there's times I disagree with what, certain aspects of the social media thing that I don't care for is that somebody will say, well, how many likes does your page have? Well, so-and-so over here has 100,000 likes. And I'm like, well, that's because, like you said, they were at the right place at the right time and they have a great following on the YouTube channel. Like I said, things that have tons of likes on Facebook or any social media outlet are already famous. That's why they have those likes. But when you're trying to promote something brand new, you can't use that as a litmus test for your potential market following. I disagree with that stuff. And then of course, I've gotten some lectures about this, but Facebook, I don't know if you guys remember and kind of how you remember it, but it started out as a particular kind of thing and right away most of the public just attached itself to it. And there were a number of things people could share, businesses or crafts or whatever. Well, all of a sudden then Facebook, after a while, like when you had a page built, well, pay this much to get this potential audience reach, which I think is honestly bogus numbers anyway.
Yeah.
So I actually at that point, and I still get an email from Facebook every day, try and build your audience on this particular page. And I'm just going, no, because some people are like, well, you'd have to pay for advertising. And I'm like, I get that, but that's not how Facebook sold themselves initially. So I said, it's a turnoff to me as someone that's like, once they have all of us hooked in and addicted or whatever, I said, then they're like, okay. And I said, and they're worth billions of dollars. They don't need the money. That's greed to me that they want to charge for like a $5 or $10 or $20 post to promote what you're doing. Plus, like I said, I don't buy the whole like, well, your post reached 1,500 people today. If you pay me $10, it's going to reach 5,000 people. And I've seen no analytical data to prove that that's true.
And I've read things that say that exact same thing, that it actually, you're just throwing your money away.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and I've heard people that are, that live on YouTube and live in podcasting and make great living doing it, say that, they're doing it a certain way, they start making decent money, and then they change the algorithm, and it's almost like you have to start all over because what was working before now doesn't, because of how they've done their updates and changed their model. So, yeah, I've heard that complaint.
Yeah, oddly enough, I mean, there's been times in the last few years, because I love watching, I'm enjoying doing this. There's a few things I love, and I love documentaries. I love podcasts. I listen to podcasts all the time. And I like watching a lot of those YouTube programs where there are pundits on there talking about, the latest movie news, or, I'm doing a 2-hour dissection about, a trailer. I enjoy those things. And I had actually considered maybe starting my own YouTube channel to do that stuff. But same thing, I don't have the time. I think it would be fun, to kind of, or if it's just even me talking about, my opinions about anything nerd related. But I sort of feel like too that, sometimes you have to be careful, because in my case, if I'm trying to promote myself as a content creator, I think some people would be confused. Well, are you a guy that's doing a video show on YouTube, or are you going to, you know what I mean? But I'm just saying, like with what you guys are doing, I can definitely see the appeal of it, because I think it would be interesting and kind of something different. So
I think in this day and age, it's almost essential, and you know this, but I know my kids would watch you if you had this channel where you talked about, because I'm always, half the stuff I don't even know what my kids watch. Like, I talk with them, and my daughter will be like, well, you should check out this guy. And I'm like, how did you even find this? And she's like, I don't know. I was just, roaming around on YouTube, and somebody mentioned something about this. And then I went to that channel, and somebody mentioned this person. And I started watching. I was like, oh, this is really good. And it's bizarre, but I almost feel like it has to be a multifaceted thing. Like, I would watch you talk about Star Trek related stuff, or where you're at with, maybe it's telling this whole story about your journey. You're putting it in a video form. And I know that you have a documentary that, and I want to talk about that a filmmaker is doing on you. But I think your story is really unique. And I think a lot of people, one of the artists that we talked to, Stefan Lucero, he's an incredible artist, and he doesn't do comic stuff, or not that I'm aware of, but he is a huge comic book fan. And I know he'll find this story interesting, your story. And I think there's a lot of people out there that would tune into something like that would be interested in hearing you talk and hearing your opinions, and then hearing your story about, your art, your content that you're creating, and your comic book art, and these characters that you've developed. I think people would be interested in that story and that your journey. I truly do.
Well, we'll see. Like I said, it's something I played around with. It's just a matter of time management.
It's a time factor, and I totally get it. I mean, I'm at a point where my kids are self-sufficient, and I don't, I was very engaged with my children in their pivotal years, from the time they were born until, even to this day, my son being 16, my daughter's now 19. So I get what you're saying. That's difficult, and I don't even want to go down that whole subject of engagement with children, because I see it so much as far as people not being engaged with their children, and it's terrible. But you're doing the right thing as a dad, as a father, being involved in your child's life, and I get it. It's hard to, as you get older too, to allocate that time, and having small children, all these factors, it makes it difficult.
Well, I will say this: Trish has obviously she's a stay-at-home mom, so she's been very good. Like that, I schedule. If I give her enough notice, this is what I have going on. I actually am doing a podcast interview on Tuesday night as well. But there have been times I've actually turned down being a guest at comic book shows because of my daughter, where I'm like, she's
also first. She's number one.
Yeah, and first thing I do when I walk in the door when I get home from work is I make sure and pick her up and kiss her and play with her. I don't even bring my computer in half the time anymore, because I'm just like, I don't. That's how I want her to remember Dad. Like, as soon as Dad walked in the door, he and I were on the floor playing with, her toys or something, So yeah, it's just going to be a kind of a time, but maybe down the road I'll still kind of have that desire to do it. But yeah, I think, if anything, I tell people, if I feel like I've found any kind of traction in what I'm trying to do, is because also I'm a fan. And I think that hopefully comes through in my work.
Absolutely. Well, and just talking with you, it's like, I could talk with you all day about a myriad of subjects of, whether it's sci-fi stuff or comic book stuff or whatever. I mean,
well, I appreciate that.
You're an interesting person to talk to. And when my wife suggested I should talk to you, and I started doing a little research, I'm like, yeah, I really want to talk to this guy.
Well, I'm very glad that she passed it along, because it kind of was. I was actually having a bit of a rough week, and so I got that message for her. It kind of cheered me up a little bit when she brought up about me connecting with you to do that. So I'm glad everything worked out. I will say one thing, kind of on a side note. My brain tends to. I've got about 20 different things I'm thinking of at the same time, but. One of the cool things for me as a fan is that I've become friends, like I said, with people in the industry, movie stars and directors and all sorts of stuff. That Chris Hunter, who's the son of Jeffrey Hunter, was the original captain in Star Trek. He was in the pilot before William Shatner was.
Oh, okay.
He played Captain Pike. Anyway, him and I have become friends on Facebook, and he's always talking about what I do. He loves my ship designs. And so that's a huge honor for me, where I'm like, here's the son of the guy that played the original Star Trek captain in the pilot, loves Black Alpha ship and talks about it all the time. When's the model kit coming out? So that's been fun for me as a fan to sit there and connect with. I'm also friends with Kevin Grievous, who created the Underworld movies, the one with Kate Beckinsale, the vampire, him and I are friends, and he wanted to work on a couple of projects together, but it would have required me to commit a lot of illustration time, which I didn't have. But so that's another thing for me as a fan that's been very kind of an honor, to people who work in the industry who have some success or connected to that have also told me, I really like what you're doing, like I said, and I, like I mentioned early on in the podcast, we don't want to be creatures that just thrive on validation, right? But it's still nice to hear.
Absolutely.
I don't care who you are.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you hear that your instincts are good, it does feel good that at least you're kind of on track, to kind of line up with what, whatever your goals happen to be. And that's another thing too. Like I've had people, when I share pictures of like all my merchandise prototypes, people are always like, where can I get that? And I'm like, well, I don't have the funding to mass produce. These are all supposed to be to get someone interested in licensing and doing the merchandise. But I get tons of requests about the spaceship, which is fun for me because I grew up loving that stuff since I was very young. My dad he would buy me and build Star Trek models for me since I was very young. And so to have people go, I want a model of your ship. I like it just as much as the Millennium Falcon or the Enterprise. I mean, that's also a very gratifying feeling that, the design is resonating with some people. Plus, my interests, I'm grateful for those because I had to know all the technical information.
Right.
My mom my mom loves it when I tell this story, but when I was about second or third grade, I could tell you that the Enterprise was 948 feet in length and has a crew complement of 430. The names of the 12 of that particular class of starship. I knew the names of all the ships. And my mom said, she goes, if you could apply yourself to your math studies the way that you do Star Trek, she said, you would be a straight A student. And of course, I took that as, not that she was kind of giving me a soft lecture, but I took that as, my mom just noticed I know a lot about Star Trek. That's what I got out of it. So she has a big laugh about that. But as a creator, as I've gotten older, like with my ships, I have schematics laid out of what room is in each deck, how big it is. And so that's, what people that don't know, that's called world building. And usually what that entails is like whatever story you're telling, there's a set of rules to the logic of that world. And if you want your story to resound with an audience, they want to be able to step into that world for a moment and go, it doesn't matter what the subject is. It could be a race car driver story and they want to know exactly what kind of race car that is, when it was built, because that for them, that creates emotional investment as well as the intellectual investment. And so as a fan, I love that stuff. Like I've got all these different cultural things that I put in my stories, like a history of certain characters and their species. And that's because I grew up loving that stuff. So I'm grateful that I had enough of that attention span to, talk about Vulcans and Romulans and, all sorts of stuff that really meant a lot to me. And I think Star Wars did the same thing, that now, of course, the downside of it is there's very ardent fans that like to argue about historical canon and all that. And I get kind of a chuckle out of that, but I'm just saying that for me, that's also benefited me as basically a creator and a fan mix, is that I'm giving the audience what I enjoy too. And I think that's why I like my spaceship design. And I've not just one, but like I have other spaceship designs they've seen on there and they're like, oh, I want a model of the bad guy's ship. I want his ship. That's why I'm always going, see, here's a potential here. But like I said, the people that are making the decisions, they don't see that stuff because they still kind of view things as a cult status, niche market that doesn't translate to like a general potential of something that's going to be successful. But and also I've had these things created. I've had action figures and the ships because I wanted toys of my own things. I've wanted those since I was a young boy. And so I tell people, I'm like, since I was introduced to Batman on TV and Star Trek, my parents immediately got me the toys. I remember I had this scooter of the Batmobile when I was about 4 or 5. I loved that thing. Like a wagon, except it was...
Yeah.
And then my dad, like I said, got me. I got a phaser. And so I like it all. I like, anything that is related to that world, not just the cartoon or the movie or the TV show. I like everything, the T-shirts and the models and the action figures. So that's why I created that in my stuff, was to say this is how I enjoy things as a fan. And I think that, if you can prove the potential that a logo or symbol is going to look good on a coffee mug or a T-shirt, you kind of start to create that kind of rhythm within people that we respond to a lot of iconography. And if you create symbols that they identify, the Superman S and, the cross for Christ and all that kind of stuff, and Batman's, people as a cultural species respond to those things. It kind of creates a unification, I think, of our interest and investment in what's going on. And so that's part of the marketing that I've also kind of tried to tap into. And as you can tell from this conversation, it gets so frustrating because I felt like I've tried to do all these steps that should make sense, and then these guys see it and they're kind of going, I don't really know what we should do with this thing. And I'm just like,
what don't you understand?
Yeah,
I've laid it out for you.
Yeah,
I've laid it out for you.
And maybe that's the problem, is I've done too much of that stuff. Maybe they like to feel like, well, I want to feel like I came to that decision or the discovery of what that means. But who knows? I guess it's hard to second guess some of what those people think sometimes.
Right. Talk to me about this documentary. I read a post the other day that's kind of on hold for the moment. Tell me about what this whole thing is what it's gonna contain, what it's about, and maybe talk about the person that's doing it.
Well, I'll start with him first. So Callan High is a personal friend who's going to film school. He's finishing up his senior year. They had an assignment this year, and it was kind of interesting because I had seen what he was doing, and I came up with an idea that I wanted to create a little clip of all my merchandise stuff, kind of as a promo piece. And on the same token, they gave him the assignment, which was to do a documentary. I guess it wasn't really important what the subject was. And so he said, you're what immediately came to mind. I was actually nervous about asking you. So when I got a hold of him and said, hey, is there any chance maybe you can shoot some footage of my action figures and all that? He goes, well, funny you should mention that. I want to do a documentary. And of course that would be part of it. But we had actually met 2 or 3 years ago, and we'd met through a mutual friend, and he'd been watching what I had been doing for a little while. And he said, I really admire what you're doing. He said, I have my own character that I've created that I want to get done. And we were both talking about how it's really tough when you don't have the right connections to get your resources in place. So in a roundabout way, he said, I inspired him to go to film school because he figured, well, nobody else is going to make like a web series of my character. I go to film school, I'll do it myself. And he made a video a while back where he does it all. He's the cinematographer, he's the director. And so he made this clip with him playing himself and him playing his comic character. And it was very well done. And so I complimented him on that. And so we got to talking and had a meeting, back in the fall, that he said, I want to do you as my senior project, and I want to do a film. And he goes, we're going to do 2 versions. The one that's supposed to be the specifications for the instructors in school. He said, but I want to do a longer one. So it's roughly being projected at about 30 minutes long, I think. It's not a long documentary, but I think 30 minutes is plenty anyway. And he basically wants to talk about how I inspired him to basically people to go for their goals facing adversity, and how do you adapt and kind of work your way around these stumbling blocks. And also, because I've talked with him enough and shared with him, like I said earlier, I'm like, yeah, there's been several times I've just like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. It's too stressful. It takes a toll on me. And so he wants the documentary to be about, and my age does play a factor, because, he said, I admire what you're doing at your age, that you're trying to do this thing and have been for a number of years, almost a decade now, and you haven't thrown in the towel.
And usually I wouldn't ask this question. I don't want to stop you. I want you to continue to tell people about this documentary, but I want you to tell people how old you are, because I think that there's a lot of artists that are our age that are still trying to, they're in your shoes. They're still trying to, gain some traction, or we want to inspire other people. So tell them how old you are and where you're at?
Well, I'm 54. I just turned 54 a couple months ago, and I actually got my foot in the door in comics when I was in my 20s, working on The Punisher.
Okay.
And I got in as the market imploded. So after that, it was really hard to find work. And then I had a couple other friends who also wanted to do comics that were from here, from Rapid City. I'm still very good friends with them. And they've actually had also success in other areas. Like one of my friends has done comic covers for DC and also worked on some movies, doing storyboards. And another friend of mine also did comics and has been an art director for video game companies for years. But the three of us had a little studio here in Rapid over 20 years ago, and we all had the collective goal of wanting to get into comics together. Two of those guys ended up getting their feet in the door in the video game industry, and after some coaxing and stuff, they kind of mentioned I should do the same thing. So that's how I got my start in video games, is because a lot of comic guys weren't getting work. You know, like I said, the market bottomed out. So therefore, until it stabilized, there was no need for new guys, especially. Like even guys that had been doing it for years were having a hard time finding work. But video games was kind of a booming new business, and it also paid a lot better salary, benefits, and so that seemed to be more the appeal. During that time, and I tend to be a late bloomer too, so I actually didn't get my feet in the door doing video games until I turned 40, which is pretty unusual. Most of the guys are like out of art school, like in their early 20s. But I think that during that time, because of how comics seemed like they were going to happen for me for a while, and then kind of didn't the way that I thought they were going to, and then video games, I sort of started reassessing my goals and going, more than anything, I still enjoy creating my own characters. And I kind of went back to that, because people, they go, well, would you ever want to try drawing comic books again? And I'm like, nah, and as I get older, that's a very as fun as it can be in a way, it's very labor intensive. I said, you don't make a lot of great money for drawing for an entire 24 hours straight, if necessary, depending upon what the script requires. I said, you could get a page done in 8 hours or 12 hours, and sometimes it's going to take you 2 days. And I said, your health can suffer. So I was like, if I'm going to go back to drawing comics, I'm going to draw my own characters. And that's about a decade ago where I decided, well, I want to actually get this character off the ground in comic form that I've had since I was in grade school. But I think that because I viewed aging a little differently than some people. Like I said, there's that 16-year-old part of my brain that thinks I'm young. I started exercising again when my daughter turned 1. I've been doing 50 push-ups a day. And it partially is to also stay active with her physically, because like I said, she unfortunately got shortchanged in the chronological department. I'm not a young dad in his 20s, and I'm like, so I got to do what I can to keep up with her. But there's also a part where that's a mental part of who I am. Like, just because I'm 54 doesn't mean that I need to convince myself I'm too old and, creaky to actually be able to exercise that way. So I think with everything else that I try and do, it's the same thing where I'm like, okay, I'm this age. And there are reminders when I get up in the morning, a little bit of arthritis and stuff, but my enthusiasm is still that of a younger man. And that's what I'm hoping kind of gets me to the finish line with what I'm trying to do, is that it's all up here, and I'll do what I can to take good care of myself for my daughter and for me, But yeah, I would just say that it isn't for the faint of heart. I keep saying that, but if you have a passion and you have the ways to, in some ways it is easier because of technology, but yeah, go for it, because I always promise myself that when I leave this world, I do want to sit there, on my bed there in the hospital, wherever it's at, and say, I gave this an honest shot. I don't want to live with, man, I wished I would have tried, I should have tried to do that stuff. And that's probably how I've approached most of my adult life, is that, because I know there's people that want to draw comics or they want to get into the entertainment industry, which is very rough. And there's a number of reasons why you probably shouldn't do it. If you're a sane person, there's a number of practical reasons, but I think your artistic spirit would suffer if you don't, so that's all I can really say about that. Like that's why I said, I constantly have the creative part of me wrestling with the pragmatic part of my brain about, what's important in life and how do you get there, and what you have to kind of let go and what you need, what you don't let go. And they're always constantly having a debate with each other. But obviously thus far, the creative part has won out because I haven't completely thrown in the towel on any of this stuff. And that's what Callan in his documentary, he's going to open up with a couple of title cards that talk about supposedly how many times did it take for Thomas Edison to discover the light bulb, and, this many attempts, and what would happen if he would have given up on this one particular attempt rather than seeing it through. And he said, I saw that. And he said, that's what spoke to me. He said, about your story, is that you're still doing this, And he goes, most people probably would have given up, especially, being a new dad and being the age that you are, but you're still like going, it shows that you believe in what you're doing. And I did have a post a few weeks ago, a little bit, I promised myself I wouldn't do this, but I do, because I want to show people I'm human. But, when you express a little self-doubt moment on Facebook, and I don't want to ever want to be one of those that like, they thrive on attention. I pulled my toenail today, and now I'm, there's people that do that, and I don't want to come across that way. So I'm like, I was questioning whether or not people were responding to my passion of what I'm doing, or were my characters and the ideas or the designs of them really that good, or was it, and I have those occasional moments. And the reason I put that on there is to show people kind of what we all go through, because a lot of people sell a very successful version of themselves in the internet age. And, I don't think you need to do a warts and all, like, here's what's going on in my life. But I'd like to think it helps people to go, you know what? I know what that's like, and that way we kind of, I guess, inspire each other, almost kind of as a cyclical thing. But getting back to Callan, Callan unfortunately had a pretty bad scare about 3 weeks ago. He had to be admitted to the hospital. I guess he has some thyroid issues, but it turned out he has compartment syndrome. And I don't really know what that is until he explained it to me. Basically, it's life-threatening, and he could have lost his legs, and they were in his lower legs, like the muscle dies. And so right now, he has to go, he just got out of the emergency room, and now he has to go get physical therapy done. He can walk, but it's difficult because he can't lift his toes, tap his feet. So he's got a good attitude about it. I mean, I was really worried about him. And so obviously the last thing on my mind is, well, what's going on with the documentary? And, we talked about it, and he just said, no, I'm just, he's got a great attitude. I got to work through this stuff. And I said, well, I don't want you to feel any pressure from me, because, you need to be here. Your health is important. If we are able to get back to the documentary, and he's already filmed a lot of footage. I mean, I guess he could release a version, but it would just be me talking, because we have a few other sequences we want to do in there. He wants to have a scene of Trish and I playing with Arya, so that, because she's still, she's kind of part of the story too. And a couple of store signing at one of the comic book stores. But overall, we've got most of my stuff filmed, and, we want to release a version that's just not me being a talking head through it. So, but anyway, I tell people, I'm going to support him and wish him a great recovery. So
I'm glad he's doing that. I'm glad he's telling your story, and we hope he gets better soon, and you guys can finish up the project and get it out there.
Yeah.
This is an important story, and this is what this podcast, I feel, is kind of evolved and becoming, telling these stories. And this is why I wanted you on, because there's people out there like yourself, and like I said earlier when I asked if you would tell everybody your age, there's tons of people out there in the same scenario, not the exact same scenario, but a similar scenario, and they want to know that what they're doing and their vision, they want to be validated, just like you said. And I think it's important that people know that the struggle is real, but you just got to keep at it, and hopefully eventually it pays off. And I think if you're tenacious and you're willing to do it, it will. But you have a great story, and you have a multitude of talent and these great characters, and I want to see you be successful, man. I want to see you do this.
Well, thank you very much, appreciated. So,
are you on Instagram at all? Have you done the Instagram thing?
Trish always posts those for me. I am, but I haven't checked it in ages. And it's usually just my comic book work, I guess, that's on there. But see, that's another one too. I've been told. I mean, I guess you being a photographer, I heard that's a pretty beneficial.
Yeah. So I'm going to be totally honest with you, man. I am really bad at the whole social media thing. Like I'm invested in it now because of the podcast, but as a photographer, I've not utilized it, which is terrible. And now I'm forcing myself to learn how to use these different platforms. But the reality of it is like yourself, I want to create stuff. I'm not really interested in spending my time doing social media stuff, but I know that's part of the world that we live in now. And it's not a part that I want to do, but I'm going to learn how to do it. So this is the year of social media for me and for this podcast.
And it's successful for people. And I think that's the thing. You just got to grit your teeth and go forward, because a lot of connections are made via, Instagram. We heard about it this weekend with John Lopez, and the whole Instagram things was huge for him. So I think it's important.
He got an exhibit in Qatar. And they paid for these huge, sculptures that are larger than this table to be shipped over to Qatar. Mm-hmm. And they paid for everything. And he sold all this work. And it was all from Instagram.
Yeah, it was all from his connections on Instagram. So
those things are important,
especially visual artists. I think if you're a visual artist and Todd, you should be doing it too. I think it's important to utilize, especially that platform, because it's really set up for, it's a visual art, as opposed to like Facebook. That's more of a connection thing. And Twitter, I see, is kind of like news driven. It's like if you got something, a tidbit of information you want to get out there, sometimes Twitter's the way to go. But when you're doing comic book covers or really pushing your wares, I think Instagram that's the place to be.
Well, I heard that because, what's really been interesting, I'd mentioned a couple of my buddies that, had gone on to do some success in games and movie stuff. We had another friend here around that same time that he's a professional photographer, and he came here from Rapid, and he's shot in every major celebrity and worked for every major periodical. So it's really been interesting, these people that come from little Rapid City and have gone on to do some pretty great things. Anyway, he was the first one that told me as a photographer that, he found a lot of things beneficial through Instagram. So that's why I brought up the photography connection, because that's what I've heard, not just from him, but other photographers, that it's supposed to be something that, but like you said, the visual end of it, I guess in general would kind of make sense. But I think that for me, like I said, the typing issue, that's what's held me back a little bit, because I since we live in such a weird age where everyone types and texts, I'm like, I can't, I'm like, we need to have a good old fashioned phone call, because for me to type you even a sentence or a paragraph, let alone a sentence, I said, is exhausting for me. So I can't. So that's why if I probably had better typing abilities, I probably would be on those things a little more, kind of just keeping everything sort of, consistent and relevant and I guess, new.
The other thing is that I'm just a little bit behind you as far as age is concerned, but I have a hard time investing in it. And I come from an age where you weren't supposed to like parade yourself around, and I don't really enjoy talking about myself that much. So anytime I'm even with this podcast, I'm thinking, we were laughing about it yesterday. I'm like, people are probably, all right, here it comes Thursday. Todd's going to release his podcast, his little spiel on podcasts. And I'm like, it feels weird to me, doing this promotion stuff. I know you have to do it, but I guess I'm old school, and that it just seems odd. It's odd to me.
Trust me, I understand that, because even the way that Facebook did their shift and like you said, the algorithms change, and that I saw somebody just post this about a week ago. They changed it where you actually had to like your own post.
Oh, really?
To get, if you want to get eyes on what you're doing. So it makes you look very narcissistic, where you're like, hey, check out what I did. I'm the first person that.
I'm glad you told me that, because with this podcast stuff, I would post something and then I would go back later because somebody would like it or whatever. And then it would show that I liked it. And I'm like, I didn't like that. Like, I wouldn't like my own post. How stupid is that? And so I'd unlike it. And then I would come back later and it would say that I had liked it again. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? So I'm glad you told me about that, because I thought I was kind of losing my mind. I'm at that age now where I'm like, am I doing this, like just clicking on it and not even thinking about it? I'm like, what the heck is going on? And I'm like, this is just bizarre. Like every time I'd show, I'm like, I'd unlike it. And then I come back and I'm like, it shows that I'm like it. It's a reality.
It's more of that goofiness, the shift that Facebook has done, besides having you pay for stuff on your page, like your page that you're trying to promote, whatever it is. Because I know I've known about it for a good couple of years, and there's still people that, they're like, how much of an egomaniac do you have to be to like your own posts? And I'm like, that's how you're going to get eyes on them. Trust me, I thought it was dumb too.
I'm just not like that. I'm not narcissistic.
Well, Todd, you got to love yourself before you can love anybody else.
See, that's the most important lesson of this podcast today. If we walk away from anything, it's that. Always learn to love yourself first.
Well, I like being in my own head, but I don't know that other people want to be there. So that's where I get weirded out about sharing too much stuff, or like, is anybody going to care? But I do care about this, and I am very invested in promoting not only this podcast, but the people that are on it. Like I want these people that come on, that give us their time, I want them to be successful. And time is valuable, and you know that as a person in their 50s and a new dad. Like everything that you do, you have to have intention. You need to have intention.
Yeah. And
you have intention with your daughter. You have intention with your career and everything else that you're doing in your life. And that's what, somebody in their 50s, I think that wisdom starts to come through, that world experience. So time is important. So if you're giving me your time, I want to make sure that you're successful, and I want you to be successful, man.
Well, I will say this. I may have mentioned it to you in a previous phone conversation that I really appreciated from both of you gentlemen today. I think you have this very balanced way of doing this. This is my first time with you guys, but I've had some podcasts in the past where it seemed like the person doing the podcast wants to interview subjects, but he spends half the podcast talking about himself. And I'm like, as a listener, it kind of takes me out of, because it's like, especially if I've listened to that person's podcast more than once, I tend to know a little bit of their history. So thank you for being very balanced today. I mean, I like people sharing their viewpoint, but I think you guys did a fantastic job today of what I think a good podcaster is all about. Is to kind of like you said, parlay someone's story for your audience. That's partially, you guys are kind of these sort of hosting this event, and it's not really something even Callan and I talked about recently too, because I know there were a couple of areas that he kind of wanted to work a little more of himself into the documentary. And I said, I didn't necessarily have a problem with that, but I said, you also kind of have to balance it out, because if people see this and it's partially about you, then they're like, well, why didn't you just make it about you? And I said, and you want your film work to speak, you as a filmmaker, not necessarily, that's supposed to be what's speaking, is your subject and the filmmaking that you're doing. And so anyway, I'm just, like I said, I'm giving you guys a compliment. I think you guys did fantastic at this today. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate the feedback.
Yeah. So as kind of closing things out, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Well, I sent you some links, I know. Mainly I just, it's going to sound funny, but Facebook. For now, it's Facebook. I tell people you can either look up Tom Rasch, Rasch, and then a lot of times on my pages, I'll share the links of the pages. It's basically me. And then I have a page for Salem Tuscan for Black Alpha, and people can kind of check out updates and stuff there too, And at some point, I'll have to kind of get back on the website thing, because I do think that's important, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. And, I know I probably will at some point, but I usually almost share daily on there for the most part. And that's what's been kind of fun too, is that when I have had news to share, people kind of, they rally behind you, and that's a great feeling, because it's like you're sort of inviting them along on your journey. And as weird as this sounds, that's something where when American Idol was all over the place years ago, I think that's why the show was such a big success, because we kind of finally got to see sort of like a little peek behind the curtain of what it's like for people wanting to make it big as a singer, right? And we got to see them from the audition process to the other parts of it, and the highs and lows of some of them being eliminated in the rounds. I said, but I think that showed me that the audience, even if they themselves are personally not there, if they can relate to something, or they just want to be a cheerleader, or whatever the case is, they find it interesting to be along in this journey with people, all the steps of it, for the most part. And that's kind of how I've sort of promoted what I'm doing. Like I said, where I'm selling my brand, but also, hey, everyone, I appreciate your support. I love everyone. In fact, I always say my family, friends, and Facebook family, because that's what they feel like. And same thing, like I've met people that I've yet to meet in person that I've known for 10 years on Facebook, that feels like a great personal friend, that you form that connection. And so when you do finally get to meet them in person, you're kind of going, whoa, what's going on here? This is the first physical time I've ever been around you, but I feel like I've known you forever, give each other a hug and all that. It's almost probably like how people feel when they see celebrities, right? Except that we're all celebrities in the social media age. So when you get to see somebody in person, it's this kind of bizarre, but I do love the fact that real connections, like I said, I prefer this just like you guys, but I've made some really great connections with fellow creatives like myself that are trying to do things, and also people who appreciate the things that we're all into, TV shows that I can discuss with them. And so that's, like I said, that's always going to be the takeaway for me. So Facebook, and there's a Black Alpha Twitter. We're not on that much, unfortunately. And same thing at Tom Rasch Instagram. I'd say those are pretty much the primary three. I haven't really gotten into the other ones that I haven't really paid attention to, I guess, honestly. So
we'll make sure that all those links are on the episode description, and push that out. And I'll do a post with all that as well. So
I do have to say one thing real quick before I forget. You guys were ahead of your time, because I just saw Christopher Nolan released a trailer for his film Tenet.
Yeah, we get lost in the Google search with that movie, and I actually went to a movie recently, and I was sitting there, and the preview came on for it, and I was like, "Here's the movie, all right." So,
so we either hope it's really successful and we can ride its wave, or we hope it tanks quickly so we can take over.
Well, I was going to say, interestingly enough, because I don't even know what that means until I started talking. You said this is our podcast. So I when you hear it, I'm like, tenant, and then I had spelled. So it actually made me want to research what that means.
Well,
So-
and that's what we're hoping.
Yeah.
That people take the initiative and get it. But
And it sounds kind of sophisticated anyway, I think.
well, thank you.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I feel like I'm on an NPR show right now, so, and with the name and everything. So, yeah.
Well, this is NPR, and I'm with no.
Yeah.
So, Tom, thanks so much for being on our podcast. We really appreciate it. It's been a great opportunity to meet you and to see what you're doing and get a little bit of what goes on in the comic book industry and content development. So thank you for being on. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. Once again, I really appreciated being here and getting to meet both of you. Great conversation. I enjoyed myself.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much.
For Tenet, this is Wes Brown.
And I'm Todd Pearson.
Thanks for joining in, and have a great week.